Good morning. Thanks for coming out, and thank you, Arlo, for so much. Just to get right to it, I'm a New Yorker and a Florida blow-in, for lack of a better word. And I've been living here, well, I like to say 10 years. It feels like about 6 years, and my wife will tell you it's more like 14 years, but I'm a newcomer. But I've been put on the defensive, as you're going to expect, for moving somehow to Florida. And I was thinking this morning, if you just inhale this morning, and look around, that's one reason to move to Florida right there. And then the other question that was brought up that was putting us on the defensive was that the state of Florida is culturally deprived. And if you just look around at the Key West Literary Seminar, so we're in the midst of the answers right here, that is a stunning example of culture being alive in Florida. So some of these, I'm going to read a mix of poems. A few of them are directly about being in Florida. So in some of them, Florida is incidental. And some of them aren't about Florida at all. But I'm going to start with a poem called The Trouble with Poetry. It's not that long a poem, don't worry. It's just one of the troubles with poetry. And it takes place in Florida. The trouble with poetry. The trouble with poetry, I realized as I walked along a beach one night, cold Florida sand under my bare feet, a show of stars in the sky. The trouble with poetry is that it encourages the writing of more poetry, more guppies crowding the fish tank, more baby rabbits hopping out of their mothers into the dewy grass. And how will it ever end unless the day finally arrives when we have compared everything in the world to everything else in the world? And there is nothing left to do then but quietly close our notebooks and sit with our hands folded on our desks. Poetry fills me with joy, and I rise like a feather in the wind. Poetry fills me with sorrow, and I sink like a chain flung from a bridge. But mostly, poetry fills me with the urge to write poetry, to sit in the dark, and wait for a little flame to appear at the tip of my pencil. And along with that, the longing to steal, to break into the poems of others with a flashlight and a ski mask. And what an unmerry band of thieves we are, cut purses, common shoplifters, I thought to myself, as a cold wave swirled around my feet, and the lighthouse moved its megaphone over the sea, which is an image I stole directly from Lawrence Ferlinghetti. To be perfectly honest for a moment, the bicycling poet of San Francisco, whose little amusement park of a book I used to carry in a side pocket of my uniform up and down the treacherous halls of high school. Thank you. Thank you. And then through the talks, which I found really engaging, the image of Florida as strictly a retirement community has come up. And this is a poem that addresses a phenomena that you find heavily in Florida, but really all over the country, and that is sudden appearance of condominium developments, gated communities. Fair enough, that's what goes on, or not fair enough, but it goes on anyway. But what attracted me were the names of these places. So they involve some animal like Beaver Hollow or Deer Meadow, right? And at some point I thought, well, wait a minute. These are precisely the animals that were driven out of their habitat, if they existed there at all. So there was kind of a sad, elegiac undertone to these names. So here's a poem about that, and it's also a sonnet, and it's spoken by an elderly widower. It's called The Golden Years. All I do these drawn-out days is sit in my kitchen at Pheasant Ridge, where there are no pheasant to be seen, and last time I looked, no ridge. I could drive over to Quail Falls and spend the day there playing bridge, but the lack of a falls and the absence of quail would only remind me of Pheasant Ridge. I know a widow at Fox Run and another with a condo at Smoky Ledge. One of them smokes and neither can run. So I'll stick to the pledge I made to Midge. Who frightened the fox and bulldozed the ledge? I ask in my kitchen at Pheasant Ridge. Thank you. And I have a couple of poems, because, as Arlo said, I'm a frequent offender here at Key West, about Key West itself. And this is touches on a subject that Joy Castro talked about, that she covers in her book, on One Brilliant Flame, about cigar rolling in Key West. And the title is Poetry Workshop, held in a former cigar factory in Key West. After our final class, when we disbanded, as the cigar rollers here had disbanded decades ago, getting up from their benches for the last time, as the man who read to them during their shift closed his book without marking the page where he left off, I complimented myself on my restraint, for never in that sunny white building did I draw an analogy between cigar making and poetry. Not even after I studied the display case containing the bladed civetta, the ring gauge, and the hand guillotine with its measuring rule, did I suggest that the cigar might be a model for the poem. Nor did I ever cite the exemplary industry of those anonymous rollers and cutters, the best of them producing 300 cigars a day, compared to 3 flawless poems in a lifetime, if you're lucky. Those who work the broad leaves of tobacco into cylinders, ready to be held lightly in the hand. Not once did I imply that an intuition tightly rolled into a perfectly shaped, handmade thing might encourage a reader to remove the brightly colored encircling band, slip it over her ring finger, and take the poet as her spouse in a sudden puff of smoke. No, I kept all that to myself until now. Thank you. So some of the poems start somewhere and end up in Florida. Some of them begin in Florida, end up somewhere else, and some of them just kind of pass through Florida as if through a cloud. So there are various Florida weight to the poems. And this poem is called Joy. And in deference to our pilot friends, I'll wait for him to pass, or her. Joy. It's not often that I see the sun rise and set on the same day as I did the other day. It's easy to tell which is which, even if you just emerge from a coma. The rising is a theater of silvery light, and the setting done and imbued by gold. On the morning I'm thinking about, it rose over a low cluster of clouds, then burst forth and lit up the sunny side of everything. And when it went down in a cauldron of molten metal and seemed to shudder in a foundry of its own making. When I lay in the dark that night, I imagined the sun shining down on Asia, always rising and setting somewhere, waking some people, sending others to bed, as it does in that love poem by John Donne. And I thought of the sun advancing in its own grander orbit, a father taking the family of planets for a ride through the Milky Way. What a brazen wonder to be alive on Earth amid the clockwork of all this motion. This was in Key West. It was January, when the early morning hours can be chilly. I remember putting on a sweater, then stepping out onto the deck with a newspaper under my arm and checking out the water and the sky before lighting up a big El Stinko cigar. You see how I had to ruin that? Brazen clockwork of all this motion. Any poet in his right mind would end right there. And it was just a little too much for my persona. So maybe light up a crappy cigar, and get real. And this is explicitly about being a stranger in a weird land, and it's called Report from the Subtropics. For one thing, there's no more snow to watch from an evening window, and no arms full of logs to carry into the house after touching the iron latch with an elbow. And once inside, no stove like an old woman waiting to devour her early dinner of wood. No hexagrams of frost to study on the cold glass panes of the bathroom. No black sweater to pull over my head as I wait for the coffee to brew. Instead, I walk around in children's clothes, shorts and a t-shirt with the name of a band lettered on the front, announcing me to nobody. The sun never fails to arrive early and refuses to leave the party, even after I go from room to room, turning out all the lights, making a face. And those birds with the long white necks, they all swivel their heads when I walk along the lakeshore, as if they all knew my password and the name of the city where I was born. I guess thank you. So, yeah, poets are supposed to be botanically and ornithologically hip and know the names of plants and birds, or at least be able to tell the difference between the two. It's always a good place to start. But yeah, some of the birds I would see, if you saw a bird like that in New York, you would call somebody. I don't know, maybe not 911, but the Audubon Society, or you report it. So this poem is about my ignorance, and it's called Osprey. Oh, large, brown, thickly feathered creature with a distinctive white head, you perched on the top branch of a tree near the lakeshore. As soon as I guide this boat back to the dock and walk up the grassy path to the house, before I unzip my windbreaker and lift the binoculars from around my neck, before I wash the gasoline from my hands, before I tell anyone I'm back, and before I hang the ignition key on its nail or pour myself a drink, I'm thinking of vodka and soda with lemon, I will look you up in my illustrated guide to North American birds, and I promise I will learn what you are called. Let's see here. Well, this is a poem not about Florida, but it was a response to a poem by Elizabeth Bishop. In her collected poems, which I was leafing through, there are two poems on facing pages. One is called Sleeping on the Ceiling, fair enough, it's poetry after all, and the other one's called Sleeping Standing Up. And obviously they were intentionally placed facing each other. So I thought I could get in there somewhere. And so I made sort of a conservative contribution to that, a poem called Sleeping on My Side. And it's also a sonnet. Sleeping on my side. Every night, no matter where I am, when I lie down, I turn my back on half the world. At home, it's the East I ignore, with its theaters and silverware, as I face the adventurous West. But when I'm out on the road in some hotel's room 213 or 402, I could be pointed anywhere. Yet I hardly care as long as you are there, facing the other way. So we are defended at all degrees, and my left ear is pressing down as if listening for hoofbeats in the ground. And let's see. Well, here's a poem that has nothing to do with Florida, but I like to read. It's a poem called Only Child, and of which I am one, and I can spot you. Yeah, there's one right there. We're all very self-identifying. If you just watch us behave at dinner or anywhere, and it doesn't take more than a minute to tell. And by the way, there's a book signing a little later today, and if you are an only child, there'll be an express line for you, because you know that you deserve it, so. So I guess this could be called In Defense of Being an Only Child, but it's just called Only Child. I never wished for a sibling, boy or girl. Center of the universe, I had the back of my parents' car all to myself. I could look out one window, then slide over to the other window without any quibbling over territorial rights. And whenever I played a game on the floor of my bedroom, it was always my turn. Not until my parents entered their 90s did I long for a sister. A nurse I named Mary, who worked in a hospital 5 minutes away from their house, and who would drop everything, even a thermometer, whenever I called. Be there in a jiff and on my way were two of her favorite expressions. And now that the parents are dead, I wish I could meet Mary for coffee every now and then at that Italian place with the blue awning, where we would sit and reminisce, even on rainy days. I would gaze into her green eyes and see my parents, my mother looking out of Mary's right eye, and my father staring out of her left, which would remind me of what an odd duck I was as a child, a little prince and a loner who would break off from his gang of friends on a Saturday and find a hedge to hide behind. And I would tell Mary all about that too, and never embarrass her by asking about her non-existence. And maybe we would have another espresso and a pastry, and I would always pay the bill and walk her home. And thank you. Well, what do you know? Here's a poem called Marijuana. As well read that. Marijuana. When I was young and dreamy, I longed to be a poet, not one with his arms wrapped around the universe or on his knees before a goddess, not one waving from Mount Parnassus, nor wearing a cape like Lord Byron, rather just reporting on a dog or an orange. But one soft night in California, I walked outside during a party, lay down on the lawn beneath a lively sky, and after an interlude of nonstop gazing, I happened to swallow the moon. Yes, I opened my mouth in awe and swallowed the full moon whole. And the moon dwelled within me when I returned to the lights of the party, where I was welcomed back with understanding and hilarity, and was known and recognized long into the night as the man who swallowed the moon, he who had walked out of a storybook and was dancing now with a girl in the kitchen. I mentioned dogs there, and I'm going to read another dog poem here. And I just want to check. I'm really bad at this. Oh, I'm okay. We're okay. This is a poem whose title tests your credulity. It's called Walking My 75-Year-Old Dog. She's painfully slow, so I often have to stop and wait while she examines some roadside weeds, as if she were reading the biography of a famous dog. And she's not a pretty sight anymore, dragging one of her hind legs, her coat too matted to brush or comb, and a snout white as a marshmallow. We usually walk down a disused road that runs along the edge of a lake whose surface trembles in a high wind and is slow to ice over as the months grow cold. We don't walk very far before she sits down on her worn haunches and looks up at me with her rheumy eyes. Then it's time to carry her back to the car. Just thinking about the honesty in her eyes, I realize I should tell you she's not really 75, she's 14. I guess I was trying to appeal to your sense of the bizarre, the curiosities of the sideshow. I mean, who really cares about another person's dog? Everything else I've said is true, except the part about her being 14. I mean, she's old, but not that old, and it's not polite to divulge the true age of a lady. Thank you. Here's a short poem. It's about, I've been a professor most of my life, and it's about preparing for class. It's called Lesson Plan. Overcast morning, cool and gray. The cat bends low to drink from the swimming pool like a tiger at an oasis. I bend to snip off a few dead twigs from a miniature orange tree with its miniature oranges. In an hour, I will talk to some students about a poem I wrote over 30 years ago. I think I will start off by telling them about the miniature orange tree with its miniature oranges in a terracotta pot by the pool, and just go from there. Let's see I think we've left Florida behind for the moment, and I have a few more minutes left, I think, so I'm going to, okay, very good. I'm going to read, maybe I'll go back to this longer poems, but my newest book is called Musical Tables, and it's sort of a play on musical chairs, only if you substitute tables for the chairs, you really run into some immediate problems, like where to sit down, and of course the tables just get in the way, obstruct any kind of movement, so it's really an impossible game. And the distinction of the book, and this is very new for me, these are all very short poems, and I'm not kidding. I'm not messing around. Sonnet's not a short poem. These poems are 3 lines, 2 lines, 1 line, 4 lines. They're really short. So I may read a sample of those, and I'll just give you the title and the poem. The first one is called 3 a.m. Only my hand is asleep, but it's a start. Okay. You're rolling with this right away. I like that. Carbon dating. He tried it once as a last resort, but most of the women were 1 million years old. A little more serious here. Divorce. No more heavy ball, just the sound of the dragged chain with every other step. I have another one called Divorce. It's not in here, but this is Divorce Part 2. Once 2 spoons in bed, now tined forks across a granite table, and the knives they have hired. There you go. And this is called Bad Hotel. I'm staying in a wonderful hotel here, and it's certainly not this one. This is called Bad Hotel. I told the woman from housekeeping, who was eager to do my room, to just come in and pretend I'm not here, which is exactly what I had been doing ever since I checked in. This is on sale, by the way. And this is just a sample. So believe it or not, the title of this poem is Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Trouble was not his middle name. Some of them are a little harsh. This one's a four-line poem called Refrigerator Light. The minute she slams the door, I stop thinking about her. Refrigerator Light. Okay. And this is called Morning Walk. The dog stops often to sniff the poems of others before reciting her own. And I know some of you know New York a little bit. Excuse me. This is called New York Directions. It's down in the village between Bleak and Bleakest. And this is called The Sunday Times. There's so much going on in the world besides these sausages. And you know, Flaubert was among other things, was the writer who always was looking for le mot juste, the perfect word. And this is called Flaubert, 3 lines. As he looked for the right word, several wrong words appeared in his window. Pianissimo. At first, I thought it meant a really big piano. All right, that's all you're getting. So I'll read just a couple of more. I think I have, a few minutes. And this is a poem called Litany. In the poem, the first poem I read, The Trouble with Poetry, I referred to poets stealing from other poets, and that goes on. I mean, literary professors call this influence, but it's really jealousy. I mean, you read something you can't stand that you didn't write it, and you try to take something from it, not exactly in a plagiaristic way, but in an influential way. And I came across a poem that was kind of an egregious example of a convention in European love poetry that starts in the Italian Middle Ages, and that is that the poet, usually in sonnet form, tries to win something from the beloved by comparing her to flattering things in nature. So your eyes are like stars, etc. And Shakespeare has a poem called that starts out, "My mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun," after mistress's eyes had been compared to the sun 3,000 times. You'd think that would put an end to it, but it still continues to this day. And I found a poem that was about 40 lines long, and it was just comparing her to everything in the universe until he just ran out of metaphoric gas, and that was the end of the poem. So he starts out his poem with these lines: "You are the bread and the knife, the crystal goblet and the wine." And I thought I would just restart the poem for him and move it in another direction. So, litany. You are the bread and the knife, the crystal goblet and the wine. You are the dew on the morning grass and the burning wheel of the sun. You are the white apron of the baker and the marsh bird suddenly in flight. However, you are not the wind in the orchard, the plums on the counter, or the house of cards, and you are certainly not the pine-scented air. There is no way you are the pine-scented air. It is possible that you are the fish under the bridge, maybe even the pigeon on the general's head, but you are not even close to being the field of cornflowers at dusk. And a quick look in the mirror will show that you are neither the boots in the corner nor the boat asleep in its boathouse. It might interest you to know, speaking of the plentiful imagery of the world, that I am the sound of rain on the roof. I also happen to be the shooting star, the evening paper blowing down an alley, and the basket of chestnuts on the kitchen table. I am also the moon in the trees and the blind woman's teacup. But don't worry, I am not the bread and the knife. You are still the bread and the knife. You will always be the bread and the knife, not to mention the crystal goblet, and somehow the wine. And I still have another 2 minutes, okay. Let's see. A poem called Cheerios. One bright morning in a restaurant in Chicago, as I waited for my eggs and toast, I opened the Tribune only to discover that I was the same age as Cheerios. Indeed, I was a few months older than Cheerios, for today, the newspaper announced, was the 70th birthday of Cheerios, whereas mine had occurred earlier in the year. Already I could hear them whispering behind my stooped and threadbare back, "Why, that dude's older than Cheerios." The way they used to say, "Why, that's as old as the hills." Only the hills are much older than Cheerios or any American breakfast cereal, and more noble and enduring are the hills, I surmised, as a bar of sunlight illuminated my orange juice. Boom. And I'm going to go back to the musical tables and end with this another shortish poem. And thank you very much for coming out and being attentive and clapping. It's always good. And this is called Children. There's a new movie out new movie out titled Children. I don't know what it's about, but I like the voice on the radio when it says, "Children, now playing everywhere."